It began not with a scandal nor a war, not even with a political betrayal, though those would come later. It began with a rumor, the kind that slips beneath heavy doors and silk curtains, the kind whispered in darkened halls by servants who know better than to speak aloud, yet cannot resist. Ferdinand VII, King of Spain, heir to centuries of grandeur and decline, bearer of an ancient crown, and yet, if you listen, you will hear that the most powerful man in the kingdom harbored a secret, one so humiliating, so unspeakable that it threatened not only his reign, but the very image of monarchy itself. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. It was the early 19th century. Spain, battered by war, revolution, and occupation, was desperately trying to hold itself together. The Bourbon dynasty to which Ferdinand belonged was no stranger to instability. His father, Charles III, had been forced to abdicate amidst public outrage and the meddling of Napoleon Bonaparte. When Ferdinand reclaimed his throne after Napoleon's defeat, many saw him as Spain's great hope, a restorer of tradition and order. But beneath the portraits and pomp, there was something fragile about the king, something that could not be easily dismissed. Historians would later argue over its nature. Some blamed childhood trauma, the boy who had watched his father humiliated, his mother scheming, his court divided. Others whispered of inherited frailty, a byproduct of Bourbon inbreeding, where cousins married cousins generation after generation until bloodlines curdled. But in truth, the cause mattered less than the result, because Ferdinand VII, King of Spain, was a man plagued by weakness. Not political weakness, though that too would come, but something more private, something of the body. He could not perform his royal duty, not in the bedroom, not with a queen, and in a monarchy built on heirs, on dynastic continuity, this was no minor flaw. At first, the court tried to cover it up. Marriages were arranged, first to Princess Maria Antonia of Naples, a political alliance meant to stabilize the realm, but no heir came. Months passed, then years. Whispers grew. Was the queen barren? Or was the problem elsewhere? Letters survive. Delicate, coded references to the king's health, the unfortunate condition, the impediment. Courtiers, physicians, and foreign ambassadors alike began to piece together the truth. Ferdinand could not consummate his marriage. The humiliation was profound. For a king, it was catastrophic. Treatments were attempted. In an era of crude medicine and even cruder superstition, Ferdinand submitted to them all. Bleedings, tonics, herbal infusions, even, if some sources are to be believed, magical rituals performed in secret. Nothing worked. And the queen, Maria Antonia, trapped in a gilded prison, blamed for a failure that was not her own. Her letters to family reveal a deepening despair. "I am surrounded by silence," she wrote. "No child, no hope, no voice to speak of my pain." She died young, her health broken, and the secret remained hidden for a time. But a king must have an heir. Another marriage was arranged, this time to Maria Isabel of Portugal. And again, the cycle began. Hushed hopes, long nights, no child. Rumors could no longer be contained. Foreign courts mocked. Pamphlets circulated in the streets of Madrid, crude illustrations suggesting the king's impotence. The people, hungry for distraction from war and poverty, whispered and laughed. Ferdinand became increasingly paranoid. Ministers were dismissed, friends exiled. The king retreated deeper into himself and into obsession. He began to search for a cure more desperately. Physicians were summoned from across Europe. The best minds of France, Austria, Italy. They examined the king, prescribed elaborate treatments, baths of bull's blood, electrical stimulation, aphrodisiacs made from rhinoceros horn. Nothing worked. At night, in the great, echoing halls of the palace, Ferdinand would rage. "Am I not king?" he shouted, according to one servant's diary. "And yet I cannot rule my own body." One can only imagine the humiliation, not simply of a man, but of a monarch upon whom an entire nation depended. And yet, the most humiliating part of the story was still to come, because even as his body betrayed him, Ferdinand's desperation for an heir would drive him to an act that no king, no man should ever have had to endure. But if you think this is the end of Ferdinand's story, you have no idea what lies ahead. Now tell me, if you were in Ferdinand's place facing such public shame, would you have fought or fled? When Maria Isabel died in childbirth, yet another queen lost and still no heir, the scandal of Ferdinand VII could no longer be contained within the palace walls. By this point, every noble house in Europe knew the rumors. The King of Spain could not produce an heir. Ambassadors wrote careful letters to their courts, noting the deep melancholy of the Spanish court. In London, Vienna, and Paris, Ferdinand became a laughingstock. Satirical cartoons depicted the Spanish lion rendered toothless, or worse, gelded. And inside Spain, a darker mood was taking hold. Spain had always been a land of contradictions. Deeply Catholic but riddled with superstition, obsessed with honor, yet driven by gossip. A king's virility was not a private matter. It was a reflection of divine favor. For many Spaniards, Ferdinand's problem was not merely physical. It was seen as a sign that God had turned his face from the Bourbon line. Priests preached dark sermons about sins of the fathers. Peasants muttered about curses. Some even whispered that the king's condition was a punishment for his cruelty, for Ferdinand was no gentle monarch. He ruled with an iron fist, crushing dissent, imprisoning liberals, restoring the Inquisition. And yet, in this one private domain, he was powerless. It is in this context that the most extraordinary chapter of the king's humiliation begins. Desperate beyond reason, Ferdinand was approached by a small, secretive brotherhood of court physicians, men who trafficked in forbidden remedies, in alchemy, and the occult. They promised what no doctor of Europe had delivered, a cure. But the price would be high. In the archives of the Escorial, among the forgotten papers of the royal apothecary, survives a single cryptic letter. We have begun the preparations. His Majesty will undergo the ritual during the dark of the moon. May God have mercy. What was this ritual? The records are silent, but later accounts suggest something more than mere medicine, a mixture of alchemical elixirs, anointings, and, most disturbingly, the use of a young and pure vessel, in other words, a virgin. Here, the story darkens further, for it is said that the king, under the direction of these shadowy healers, was encouraged to test his condition upon young maidens, far from the public eye. Noble daughters were quietly sent away, servants dismissed, records erased. Did any succeed? None. The king's shame deepened, and yet he refused to stop. Night after night, new girls were brought to the palace. The royal household, once the glittering center of Spain's nobility, had become a place of shadows. Outside, the people suffered. The economy collapsed. Revolution brewed. But Ferdinand was consumed by one thought alone, an heir. And then, at the very height of this desperate period, came the proposal that would forever stain his reign. Marry his own niece, Maria Christina of Bourbon, young, fertile, devout, barely 23, and, crucially, of the royal blood. The match was politically advantageous, but also grotesque. The king was 43. The bride, his own blood relative. To some, this was seen as yet another act of Bourbon decadence. To others, it was the king's final chance, an attempt to cheat nature itself. The wedding was arranged with unseemly haste. The court's reaction was divided. Some were appalled, others merely cynical. But all agreed, if Maria Christina failed to bear a child, Ferdinand's humiliation would be complete. And so began perhaps the most surreal chapter of the king's life. Under constant pressure and driven by sheer will, Ferdinand submitted to even more extreme treatments. Secretive reports to the royal confessor suggest that the king's health was deteriorating rapidly. He grew bloated, erratic, consumed by strange appetites. And yet, Maria Christina became pregnant. The court erupted in disbelief. Had the treatments worked? Had the impossible happened? Or, as some whispered, had another man been enlisted to ensure success? We will never know. In 1830, Maria Christina gave birth to a daughter, Isabella. The king was jubilant. At last, an heir. The dynasty would survive. or so it seemed. But of course, this was not the end of the story. Because Ferdinand VII's greatest humiliation, his darkest secret, had only just begun to surface. But if you think the tale of the infertile king ends here, you are very much mistaken. Now tell me, if you were a ruler in such a situation, would you risk the scandal or sacrifice your crown? The birth of little Isabella changed everything, or so it seemed. For the Spanish court, weary of scandal, it was a miracle. Bells rang across Madrid. Priests proclaimed divine favor restored. Ambassadors sent letters home praising the king's new vigor. The common people, too, embraced the moment. Spain had an heir. But beneath the surface, doubts festered. The child was a girl, and while this mattered less than it once had, there remained the matter of succession. Under Spanish law, a son would be preferred. Worse, Ferdinand's health was crumbling. The once corpulent king grew skeletal, riddled with pain. He could barely walk unaided. Whispers grew louder. The king was dying. And in his shadow, another figure waited. Carlos de Bourbon, the king's brother. Tall, handsome, devout, Carlos had long harbored ambitions for the throne. To many conservative Spaniards, he was the true heir, a man of strength and certainty, unlike his weakling brother. Now, with Ferdinand failing and only a daughter as successor, Carlos moved. It began subtly. Clerics loyal to Carlos preached sermons about the natural order. Pamphlets circulated, questioning the legitimacy of Isabella's birth. In aristocratic salons, coded phrases were whispered, "A child of uncertain paternity cannot rule Spain." And then a more sinister thread emerged. Among the king's inner circle, a rumor began to spread that Ferdinand himself doubted the child's parentage. Was this true? The records are murky, but one letter preserved in the archive of a foreign envoy suggests that the king, in moments of illness and delirium, raged against Maria Cristina. "She has deceived me. The blood of the Bourbon may yet die with me." If Ferdinand's own belief in Isabella wavered, the political implications were enormous. Carlos seized the moment. His allies in the church issued declarations on dynastic purity. Conservative nobles flocked to his side. In rural Spain, peasants were told that the king's child was a bastard and that only Carlos could save the nation from dishonor. And then, the king, weakened and desperate, made a fateful decision. In 1833, mere months before his death, Ferdinand issued the Pragmatic Sanction, a legal decree overturning the ancient law of male-only succession. With this act, Isabella would inherit the throne. The document was revolutionary. It was also incendiary. Carlos and his followers declared it invalid. Civil war loomed. But beneath this legal drama lay the king's final humiliation. One whispered among servants and courtiers, never officially recorded, that even on his deathbed, Ferdinand begged to know the truth. Was Isabella truly his daughter? Maria Cristina, desperate to protect her child, is said to have sworn upon the host itself. The priests blessed the king. But did he believe? None can say. What we do know is this. When Ferdinand VII died on 29th of September 1833, Spain was on the brink of chaos. His body, emaciated and ravaged, bore the marks of years of treatments and desperate attempts to overcome his condition. And in the hearts of many Spaniards, one question remained. Was the king a father or a fool? As the Carlist Wars exploded across the land, and brother fought brother, the shadow of Ferdinand's shame hung over it all. His secret, the humiliation of a lifetime, had set Spain ablaze. But if you think the story ends with the king's death, there is far more you have yet to learn. So tell me, if you were Maria Cristina, would you have risked it all to preserve the lie? Ferdinand VII was dead. Long live Queen Isabella. But few in Spain accepted this as truth. As dawn broke over Madrid the morning after the king's passing, two rival proclamations circulated the city. One from the court hailed the young Isabella II as sovereign under the regency of her mother, Maria Cristina. The other from Don Carlos claimed the throne by divine and dynastic right. And so began one of the bloodiest chapters in Spanish history, the Carlist Wars. At their heart was a simple, brutal question. one rooted in the king's deepest humiliation. Was the bloodline pure? To Carlos and his supporters, the answer was no. They painted Isabella as a usurper, the child of a scheming queen and a powerless king. They denounced the pragmatic sanction as a perversion of God's will. But beneath the public fury, private truths emerged. Some whispered, some written, some preserved only in coded letters and forgotten diaries. It was in these shadows that Ferdinand's most humiliating secret truly spread. A letter penned by an Austrian ambassador shortly after the king's death survives in Vienna's archives. In it, he writes, "The Spanish court reeks of suspicion. It is said, without irony, that the king's infirmity had rendered him incapable of fathering the child. Yet none dare speak this openly, for fear of the regent's wrath." Other reports from British and French envoys echo the same grim theme. The king's condition, long concealed from the public, was now an open secret among Europe's elite. Tales of failed treatments, of grotesque devices and miracle cures were shared in salons from London to Paris. And with each telling, Isabella's legitimacy crumbled further. Maria Cristina fought back fiercely. She controlled the court, the capital, and, most importantly, the narrative. Loyal priests preached sermons defending the queen's virtue. Royal proclamations declared any attack on Isabella's birth an affront to the crown and to God. But beyond Madrid, the tide was turning. In the rugged north of Spain, Navarre, the Basque country, Aragon, the Carlist cause caught fire. Here, ancient loyalties and deep Catholic faith fueled rebellion. For many peasants and nobles alike, the idea of an illegitimate queen was intolerable, and so they rose. Don Carlos's armies, a patchwork of fervent believers and opportunists, swept across the countryside. Town after town declared for the true king. The First Carlist War had begun, and through it all, Ferdinand's secret lived on. In the stories of soldiers, the whispers of villagers, the angry songs sung in rebel camps. The king was no man. How could he father a queen? Maria Christina's regency faced constant peril. Courts of Europe watched with fascination and horror. British and French envoys advised caution, but behind closed doors, many doubted Isabella's claim. One chilling account comes from a private letter by Lord Palmerston, then British Foreign Secretary. "The girl upon the throne may wear the crown, but her blood is tainted by doubt. It is a fiction Spain may not long endure." Meanwhile, in the rebel strongholds, Carlos himself embraced the scandal. He issued proclamations denouncing Maria Cristina as a liar and adulteress. He spread pamphlets luridly detailing the late king's incapacity, and he promised his followers a Spain restored to true faith and true kingship. For the common people, the argument was simple and brutal. A king who could not be a man could not be a father, and a daughter born of such shadow could not rule. Yet, against all odds, the regency held. Through cunning diplomacy, military aid from Britain and France, and sheer determination, Maria Cristina kept Madrid secure. Her generals won key victories. Gradually, the tide turned, but the price was immense. Tens of thousands died. Villages burned. Families were torn apart. And through it all, Ferdinand's ghost, his shame, haunted the land. Even after the First Carlist War ended, the question of legitimacy lingered. Isabella II, now older, wore the crown, but never escaped the shadow of her father's disgrace. In court gossip, in foreign courts, in political cartoons, the old rumors endured. Isabella, the daughter of a king who could not be a man. And so we see, the king's humiliation did not die with him. It lived on, shaping Spain's destiny for decades. But if you think the War of Shadows ended here, oh no. In fact, the most astonishing revelations, the secrets buried deepest, were yet to come. So tell me, do you believe Spain was ready for the truth?